This week's case is about a brutal murder of a 19-year-old girl and the struggle of convicting the perpetrator who they think has done this. So, let's get started. Hello everyone, my name is Brandy, and every Friday I bring you a true crime case or mystery with one or more of my fabulous felines. Brucey here, he is one of my biggest cats. He's 16 pounds and he loves these little hammocks, and I swear he's gonna break it off one day. It just sags so much. Are you comfy, boo-boo? This case was a suggestion by Dottie Esters, so thank you, Dottie, for the suggestion. I have other cases that you guys have suggested to me. I was going to do one of those suggested cases last week, but another true crime channel covered it, and I try to avoid covering cases the same week that another true crime channel covered if I can help it. So that suggestion got put off, and instead we did the Valentine's Day killings. I have a list of cases to cover, and a few of those are suggestions by the viewers. And I will say that some cases, one in particular that was suggested to me, there is a lot of information and I just need more time to research it. If I've responded to you saying that I would cover the case or I would look into it, I will get to you, I promise. Okay, but this week's case, let's dive in. Jessica Chambers was born February 2nd, 1995 in Mississippi. Now, her parents got divorced when she was 3 years old, but they had a good relationship and they both were in her life as she grew up. Jessica and her mom were living in Cortland, Mississippi. Jessica did have an older brother named Ben Chambers. Now, Ben was a good 17 years older than her, but despite their age gap, they were very close. Jessica was a typical teenager. She was kind, cheerful, and she was known for her beautiful blue eyes. In high school, Jessica was a cheerleader, and she was known for being like a great acrobat. Now, in 2012, Jessica turned 16 and her behavior began to change. She sort of went into this rebellious state. I mean, I know I did at 16. I think we all do. But Jessica sort of like stopped cheerleading and she stopped going to other school activities that she was involved in. She started really defying her parents and started pretty much doing whatever she wanted. She also started using marijuana at this time as well. Now, unfortunately, around this time, tragedy struck, and Jessica's older brother, Ben, was killed in a car accident. Now, Jessica was devastated over this, and family would say that this further contributed to her being rebellious and her rebelliousness in general. So Jessica started getting mixed up with some local gangs in the area. While running with these gangs, she met a guy named Travis Sanford. Now, Travis was actually 28 years old when Jessica was 16, but regardless of the age gap, the two started dating. Now, Travis would end up, getting arrested in a fight, and due to his prior convictions, he was actually looking at a long-term sentence, at least a couple years. Now, Jessica was very upset by this, that he was had to, spend a couple years in prison. So she vowed that she would wait for him until he got out. Now, 3 years later, Jessica is now 19 years old, and she is still keeping her promise to Travis to wait for him. He's still in jail. By this time, Jessica did get a job at a clothing store, and her rebelliousness had sort of started to calm down a bit. Her relationship with her parents was much better than it had been earlier. Now, Jessica still hung out with some people that her parents considered bad influences and, wish she wouldn't hang out with these people, but Jessica was growing up and she seemed to be making better decisions. Now, in December of 2014, Jessica left home early that morning to go hang out with some friends, and she did come back home in the early afternoon, and her mom stated that she seemed like stressed and tired. So Jessica went to her room and took a nap. She woke up from her nap, and about 5 p.m. Jessica had gotten a call from one of her friends. So she quickly got dressed and told her mom that she had to run an errand and she'd be right back. 2 hours went by, and Jessica's mom ended up calling her because she was just checking in on her. Like, you said you'd be back, and it's like 2 hours later. Jessica told her mom that she was getting gas in her car. She was going to stop and grab something to eat, and then she would be home soon. Unfortunately, Jessica never made it home. At 8 p.m. that night, the fire department was called because there was a car on fire on a rural road. When the fire department arrived, they saw the car on fire, but they also saw a severely burned young woman walking with difficulty towards them until she finally collapsed on the ground. Emergency personnel immediately approached the woman to, give her aid. They were unable to recognize who she was because she was burned over 95% of her body. Her hair was all burned off. Her clothes were pretty much burned off, where she was only in her underwear. She also had gone blind. She couldn't see because her face was burnt so badly. Through all of this, however, the young woman was able to tell emergency personnel her name, and she muttered, "I'm Jessica Chambers." Jessica was put into the waiting ambulance, and officers asked her, "Do you know who did this to you?" Now, Jessica responded with something like Eric or Derek, but it was hard to make out because what they determined later is that whoever did this had actually poured gasoline onto Jessica's face, into her nose, into her mouth, and set her on fire. So her face, lips, and throat were severely burned. Jessica was taken to the hospital, where she underwent several life-saving procedures and surgeries, but unfortunately she would pass away the next day due to complications of her injuries. The only place that Jessica was not burned was, some of her pelvic area, her buttocks, and the soles of her feet, which told investigators that she was seated in the car when it was set on fire. So of course authorities immediately start their investigation, and they start by looking at Jessica's cell phone and looking at the GPS on Jessica's car. They did find security video footage of Jessica at the gas station where she told her mother she was at in Cortland, and she was alone at the time and seemed fine. She seemed calm. After leaving the gas station, the GPS showed that she traveled to Batesville, which is about 10 minutes from Cortland, which authorities believe that she was going there to pick somebody up based on the text messages in her phone. She spent some time in Batesville. She then left Batesville and came back to Cortland, where that's when her mom had called her. Her mom had stated at the time that Jessica sounded like annoyed while she was talking to her on the phone, and she really would answer her questions with like one-word answers mostly. Now, as police were working this case, social media, of course, blew up. And everyone had their own theories. And we all know how social media is so helpful in that area sometimes. Sometimes it can be, but in this case, it went badly. First, all the armchair detectives came out, and right away they accused Jessica's boyfriend, Travis Sanford, of, he set her on fire, they probably got in a fight, blah, 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 blah. Well, there was one problem. Travis was still in jail, so he couldn't have done this at least directly, right? So then when everybody found out Travis was still in jail, they jumped to the next theory where they blamed the gas station attendant. Now, there was no evidence police were not even looking at the gas station attendant. They just were throwing out wild accusations. But because it was thrown out on social media and word of mouth got out, this poor gas station attendant ended up selling the gas station and moving to a different town because of all the pressure that he was under. Then Jessica had a boyfriend a year or so earlier, and what started off as a very innocent post by this boy's mother about Jessica, she had posted kind of a heartfelt, I can't believe Jessica's gone type thing, and she had posted like an older picture of Jessica and her son when they were together. Well, then social media like copied that picture and started spreading around and blaming this boy for Jessica's murder. This, old boyfriend of hers, he lived in Iowa for the past year or so. So, I mean, there was no evidence. He was not connected to the crime at all either. Meanwhile, the police were leading their real investigation, and their first focus was namely on anyone named Eric or Derek or anything like that. There were more than 150 people questioned in this case, but no suspects jumped out that weren't easily ruled out due to solid alibis. For example, there was this one sex offender, and his name was Eric, and he was stalking Jessica, allegedly. But the night of the murder, he had a solid alibi, and the police ruled him out. Now, medical staff and the coroner had stated that Jessica's injuries were so extensive that it was surprising that she was even conscious, that she could even walk, and whatever name she said maybe wasn't a name at all, and they were just sounds of like pain and gurgling and stuff like that, and somebody might have misheard Eric or Derek. But the emergency personnel at the scene, and there's several of them, they all testified that no, she talked. She told us her name, and as she was being put into the ambulance, she was saying like, I'm cold, which would be kind of on par with her injuries. She was burnt so badly she was cold. So a $54,000 reward was put out for information leading to an arrest in this case. However, there is one suspect that began to stand out to investigators. On Jessica's phone, authorities saw text messages and phone calls from a guy named Quentin Tellis. Quentin was a gang member, and he was known for, his criminal past of mostly robbery and drug possession. He was 26 years old. Quentin did live in Cortland, and he lived just a couple miles away from where Jessica's car was on fire. Now, it appeared that Jessica and Quentin had met through some acquaintances a month prior, and they had been talking for about a month or so and had hung out a few times. Quentin appeared to want more with Jessica, and several of his texts to her, were sexually explicit. He was, propositioning her, he was talking dirty to her, but Jessica had always seemed to, at least in the text messages, pull away from him when he did that. She either stopped responding or she had some reply like, oh Lord, no, something like that. According to Quentin, him and Jessica were in a romantic relationship. But according to Jessica's friends, although they may have been flirty with each other, Jessica's friends stated that Jessica just wasn't interested in Quentin in that way. Plus, she was waiting for Travis. Who knows? We still don't know completely 100%. Now, when Quentin was questioned by police, Quentin first stated that he hadn't seen Jessica, that night or that day or whatever. He had no idea what was going on. He then backtracked because there was some evidence that they were together. Then he stated that, yes, Jessica came to Batesville to pick him up, and they had dinner in Batesville at a Taco Bell. And then the two of them drove back to Cortland together, where Jessica dropped him off at his house. While they were there, they smoked marijuana in the car, and Quentin said that they had sex for the first time, and then she left about 7 p.m. or so. And then Quentin said that after Jessica left his house, he met up with a friend for the rest of the night. However, that friend that he stated had come in and said, yeah, I was not with Quentin that night. I have no idea what he's talking about. Quentin also threw out a few other names of friends, alibis, however you want to put it, that he was with that night. But they all seemed to come back and be like, no, we were not with Quentin that night. Quentin had to finally admit that after he was with Jessica, he really wasn't with anybody. This wasn't looking good for Quentin. Now, Quentin's DNA was found on Jessica's car keys, and Jessica's car keys were found quite a ways away from her car, like almost a half-mile away from her car. Authorities believe that whoever set the car on fire had the keys in their hand and started walking away and, threw them down a ways away from the crime scene. Now, authorities pulled Quentin's phone location. It showed Quentin in the vicinity of the car fire that night, and they were able to retrieve deleted text messages and phone calls from Quentin's phone. Now, later, Quentin did admit that he went through and deleted all of those text messages and calls because when he, found out that Jessica had passed away, he just didn't want a dead person's information in his phone. It creeped him out, apparently. So authorities started putting the evidence and circumstantial evidence and all this stuff together, and they stated what they believed happened that night. So they stated that Jessica picked up Quentin in Batesville, they ate at Taco Bell, and then she brought him home to Cortland. There, they believe that Quentin, being frustrated that Jessica kept pushing him away, ended up sexually assaulting Jessica in the car. He then either choked her or suffocated her until she fell unconscious. And when she fell unconscious, Quentin thought she was dead. Now, forensics were unable to determine if Jessica was sexually or physically assaulted. However, the body was such in bad condition that they were unable to rule it out either. So authorities continued to guess that Quentin freaked out that he killed Jessica, thought she was dead, drove her car down a couple miles on the rural road from where he lived, and then set it on fire to cover up his crime. Quentin would always and continue to deny that he had anything to do with Jessica's death. Now, here's something interesting. 8 months after Jessica's murder, while authorities were still investigating Jessica's murder, another woman was found dead. Ming Chen Sayo was a 34-year-old woman who was attending college. She was found dead in her apartment on August 18th, 2015. Now, it was determined that she had died about 10 days earlier and, just wasn't found until then. She had been tortured and stabbed over 30 times. Now, authorities believe the motivation of this crime was they believed someone had her debit card and was torturing her to get, the PIN number for it. Investigators got information from the bank that Ming's card was used after her death, and someone had withdrew $1,000 from an ATM. Guess who was in the area at the time of the crime? Quentin Tellis. Quentin was caught using Ming's card, and the ATM footage showed him withdrawing the money. They also state that they had circumstantial evidence that would put Quentin in Ming's apartment at the time of the murder as well. So again, not looking good for Quentin. Now, authorities were, they're building a case for Jessica's murder, and they were pretty confident that Quentin was responsible for Jessica's murder. So he was finally arrested for her murder, and his trial began in October 2017. Now, this trial ended up as a mistrial. The jurors just couldn't come to a conclusion. So they started a new trial, and that trial began in September of 2018. At this new trial, there was a new witness that came forward, and her name was Sherry Flowers. Now, Sherry stated that she was driving down the road where Jessica's car was found the night of the fire, but obviously before this whole thing went down. She said that while she was driving down that road, it was just after dark, and a black man who looked about 19 years old, Quentin was 26 at the time, flagged her down and asked for a ride just a couple miles up the road to his relative's house, which is actually right by Quentin's house. Now, Sherry recognized the name of the relative, so she felt comfortable giving this man a ride, so she did. Now, she dropped this man off near this relative's house, but not at it. It was like on the corner, and he said he could walk from there. Authorities talked to this, the relative, because he actually gave the name to Sherry. So I'm not going to say the name. You can find it. But anyway, the authorities talked and actually brought her in to testify. And this woman who this man stated was a relative testified that Quentin Tellis and her are distant relation, and she does live near him. They were kind of, right on this, across the street or catty corner or something like that. It was pretty close, but they don't really talk, and she hadn't talked to him for years, and he definitely did not stop by that night to visit. Prosecutors were trying to establish that it was Quentin who Sherry picked up that night, and that Quentin accidentally gave away his identity by saying, this relative's name that lived by him without really thinking about it. Prosecutors then argued that once Quentin was dropped off, he went to his shed by his house where he had a 5-gallon gas can, and then he walked the couple miles back down to Jessica's car where she was still unconscious, poured gasoline all over the car, all over her, and then set it on fire and walked back home. And that all happened about 8 p.m. Now, a couple things that were picked apart about Sherry's testimony. Sherry never really pointed at Quentin in court and said, yes, that is the man I picked up. She wasn't 100% sure because it had happened 4 years prior and it was dark and she just couldn't be sure. She was also questioned why it took her 4 years to come forward. And she really didn't have an explanation for that, even though she heard about Jessica's death 2 days after, this man asked for a ride. And she did kind of think maybe it was, kind of fishy, but yeah, it took her 4 years to come forward about it. So unfortunately, again, the second trial ended in a mistrial. Basically, the jurors were saying that the DNA samples and the eyewitnesses, they conflicted each other, and they just couldn't make a decision. And it didn't help that the cell phone GPS data that was, showed Quentin in the vicinity, it was being questioned also because Quentin's house and Jessica's car, they were a couple miles apart. It's a rural area, and there's not a lot of towers in a rural area, so you really can't, triangulate location that way when you're only using one tower. And according to an expert that was up on the stand, that really using only one tower in that rural area, the location that somebody is at using the cell phone can only be narrowed down to a 10 square mile area. So since Quentin lived so close to where Jessica's car was found, it doesn't put Quentin exactly in where the car was found. He could have been a couple miles up a road at home, and it just puts him in the vicinity because he lives there. Then, of course, there's the whole debate about Jessica saying Eric or Derek, and that seemed to put a huge confusion factor in the trial as well. Now, in February of 2019, Quentin was then charged with the robbery, not the murder, of Ming Chen. Now, Quentin did plead guilty to the robbery, and because he was a habitual offender, he actually got 10 years in prison for this. In May of 2019, Quentin then was officially charged with the second-degree murder of Ming Chen, because it wasn't first-degree murder, because from the evidence and autopsy and everything, they determined that Ming Chen had her stab wounds. She had a whole bunch of superficial ones, which was more like she was being tortured to give the PIN number to somebody. They just went too far and ended up killing her. So it wasn't first-degree murder, it was second-degree murder. But his trial for that had been postponed and due to the pandemic, and there was other legal issues going on with him. He's just an all-around great guy. At this point, there is no date set for Ming's trial murder, but in September 2022, there's going to be a hearing about it, and authorities are hoping that at that time, they will then set the date for the Ming Chen case. So he gets to go on trial for that one. In the meantime, he's in prison in Louisiana doing his 10-year sentence. Now, March 2019, Travis Sanford, who was Jessica's boyfriend back in the day, he had been out of jail for a while. He was shot to death. Now, authorities stated that Jessica and his deaths are not related. After all, he was a gang member. So in October of 2021, Jessica's mother passed away at age 52. So unfortunately, she didn't get to see the outcome of what may potentially happen. But family and friends have taken solace that Jessica and her mom are reunited in heaven. Now, prosecutors have stated that they do plan to retry Jessica's case with Quentin as the defendant and add new witnesses, apparently, that they have. One being a speech expert. There has been no trial date set at this time that I found. So we are just going to have to wait and see how this one turns out, kids. So what are your thoughts? Do you think Quentin did this? I'll tell you what, if he is innocent, he did not do himself any favors by lying to the cops and deleting evidence on his phone and then apparently, allegedly killing Ming Chen. Like, dude, you just dug your own grave at that point. Now, there is a great documentary about Jessica's case on Discovery Plus, if you want to check that out. And there's also a Facebook page called Justice for Jessica, and both links are in the description box below. I'd love to hear what you think in the comments down below. If you would like to become a feline friend, please hit that subscribe button. And if you'd like to become a feline fan, please hit that join button for special perks. My thoughts and prayers go out to Jessica's family. I hope this eventually gets resolved and they get closure. In the meantime, you guys stay safe, and I will see you next Friday.